all your questions during the live broadcast. Thanks for joining. We'll get started in 1 minute. All right, good day, good morning, and good evening. This is a global webcast. Thank you all for joining. My name is Steve Garrison. I'm the MC today. This is our third Open XDR Summit Outcomes Series. We're all about outcomes here in cybersecurity because that's what matters, the results. Just to recap, outcome one was two stellar MSSPs, Scott and Trevor, talking about what is Open XDR and why did they adopt it. Then we had John and Amanda, two enterprise advocates, talk about how they deployed it, the challenges and the successes that they saw. Today, we have two phenomenal speakers to talk about the higher level budgeting and risk cost analysis and how to think through a big platform transition. So you can see my smiling face there on the right. Steve Garrison, again, your MC today. I also have Suzanne Tuckler here today who will answer your questions. Say hello, Suzanne.
Hello, everybody. Welcome.
Thank you, Suzanne. So you know her voice. So the two amazing speakers that we have, I am so proud to have these two gentlemen here. I know them well. They both will give you lots of great content and understanding how they think as CIOs. These are the ultimate decision makers. Sorry, Russ and Ryan, don't want to embarrass you there, but I really mean that. You are at the top of the pyramid in all enterprise decisions. Russ, why don't you introduce yourself? Tell us about your organization. Tell us about yourself a little bit, please.
Thanks, Stephen. I really appreciate you giving us the opportunity to talk about this today. I think it's an important topic and I'm more than willing to share. I'm Russell Carlotto. I'm the Vice Chancellor and Chief Information Officer at the University of Denver. Denver has roughly 14,000 students, split 50-50 between undergrad and grad, with about 3,000 faculty and staff underneath that as well. Prior to that, Clemson University, University of Southern California, and started out my career with 2 decades at the Associated Press, running their IT department for everything from the Rockies through the Guam and Saipan. So thanks again, Steve. That's the Reader's Digest version.
I love it, Russ. Thank you. It's a great background, and I know you're going to bring us a lot of insights today. Roy and Lloyd, please do the same. Tell us about yourself.
Yeah.
Who you are.
Thanks, Steve, and good afternoon and good morning to some of you. Ryan Lloyd here. So I'm the CIO for EBSCO Industries. We're a privately held diversified conglomerate. We tend to operate across 5 different industry verticals, but we own just over about a dozen companies. And here at EBSCO, we look to consolidate cybersecurity and provide higher level of standards across our BUs for areas of information protection. So I'd love to kind of talk to you about kind of what we've seen and what I've seen personally throughout my career here at EBSCO, as well as being a CIO for a broadband equipment manufacturing company, as well as a pharmaceutical company. So glad to be here.
Thanks, Ryan. We're going to take a step sideways before we dive into the presentation, because I just remind folks, this is all meant to help build momentum and excitement around the upcoming RSAC conference in San Francisco. This is one of the first real live big events, folks. We're back. The world is back. So please come out to June 6, 7, 8, 9 to the RSA in San Francisco and come to the Open XDR House. We have our own facility parallel to the event. We're going to be giving away prizes. We're going to make it fun. There's a lot of treasure to be found, both in swag, but also knowledge. We've got phenomenal speakers. We'll be announcing them soon. Hint, a couple of people on this call are speaking, but there's a lot more coming, because we want you to understand why people are seeing that Open XDR has transformed their business. All right, so let's kick it off. Let's start. We've got 3 topics here that we're going to drive Q&A around. And again, please use your chat tool. Suzanne is manning that chat tool, and she'll be grabbing the questions as they come, and I'll be making sure that you get your voice on this webcast. I want to talk about economics. At the end of the day, it's a business decision. And what we want to do here is just draw a really simple curve. Risk on the y-axis, cost or spend on the x-axis. Many decision makers draw a line in the sand and say, hey, I know I can't decrease risk even if I infinitely spend. So let's think that through a little bit. Let's start with Ryan. I want to start with you. I know at the end of the day, we all want you to sleep at night and have ease of mind, but that's kind of high level and kind of fluffy. So let's ground it a little bit. How do you think through a business decision like this, Ryan? Where do you draw the line, or how do you think about drawing the line?
I mean, this is a great conversational topic because this is something that we're actively thinking through. And if you look, there's no other profession that is really having this much change. If you really think about every other profession that's out there, here we are in the area of IT. And then if you look at it even further, cybersecurity, this is an ever-changing area. So, it's one of those concepts where we're continuing to see increases in data privacy laws. At the state level, we'll likely see something at the federal level. We're seeing, tougher requirements in a lot of our contracts with our customers or even our vendors on duty to notify and breach notification clauses, right to audit clauses. Employees have a higher standard when it comes to protection of their own information, which is they should. For us, even if you go through a security event, right? So you get a security event happen, God forbid, and then the war chest opens up and your CEO or your board says, spend what you need to spend to protect us. But the question becomes well, how much is right? We can look at benchmarks and try to do a percentage based off of overall IT spend or try to do a budget per employee. But ultimately, there comes a time when spending really isn't materially reducing your risk. And I think the important thing is to kind of start to change the dynamic as opposed to continuing to spend to protect. Why not spend to respond? And what I mean by that is after a certain point, you're no longer materially or significantly reducing risk. Change the game and say, well, let's now, go under the assumption that we will have an attack. How quickly can we respond? So can we only be down for a couple of days? What's our backup process? How do we do business continuity? Are our backups immutable? Where do we go? If we do have to pull the fire alarm and move all of corporate email to your private account because email's been compromised. So really thinking through and wargaming response and putting money there is really the balance between risk and going and getting increased budgets for cybersecurity spend.
Well, that's a lot of input there, Ryan. I really like the idea of benchmarks. And I think, again, you're on the same page as we are, that this is about results. So tracking response is really the key issue. Finding things is one thing. Making sure they don't do anything bad once you've found them is the other. Russ, why don't you bring your input in? How do you think about this problem?
It's similarly to what Brian brought up. It's really key. And that is it, you don't think about it in higher ed, but if you take a step back, University of Denver is $1.2 billion university, right? So it's not inconsequential. And the whole aspect of it is that you're trying to measure your resources against your technology and that risk-based analysis. And Ryan's spot on is that how do you have enough resources to respond to it? Because it's inevitable at some point in time. It's just a variable of how hard you're going to get attacked and how you respond to it. And basically measuring those 2 points is really key. So if you have a small group, do you then take that money and you do an adjunct to it to create a 24/7 SOC? Do you then look at, okay, I have a few resources that are really talented, that are at a higher level, and I can augment technology against that and balance those two? You really need to measure that aspect of it so that you can respond accordingly, because it's one of those is that it's ever changing. And like you said, when Ryan brought up the whole war chest thing, yeah, our board basically says, oh, how much money do you need? Well, you could take it to the fullest extent. It's still not going to protect you any more than where you are. If you look at the whole line in that business continuity and the risk spend, there is that inflection point where no matter how much more you spend, it's not going to really increase basically your protection and how you're going to respond to it.
Thank you, Russ. That's awesome, and builds on what Ryan said. I think we have a question from the chat tool, Suzanne?
Well, just the first question was just, will the slides be available to everybody?
Oh, okay, that's an easy one.
Yeah.
I'll post the recording on the Open XDR website. Okay. Well, look, I know there's a slightly second build here to this slide, because I think before we get into the discussion of platforms next, a lot of folks are out there change means bringing on typically a new vendor or a new idea. And there's a lot of ways we can bring this topic up. I want to talk about where you guys learn and look at new ideas later, but just how do you think through the math of a disruption, right? A new vendor, a new idea means new training, possibly, putting another vendor out on the street, depending, right? And obviously these are complex decisions. So moving from benchmarks and response metrics, Ryan, let's start with you. If someone came to you and said, I can dramatically change your response curve, how would you believe them? What kind of process through? Yeah, exactly.
So how to kind of, what's my BS meter? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, exactly, Ryan. Where is that BS meter? How do you walk through that? I think that'd be helpful.
Well, I mean, that's really tough because, when we go to these security conferences, it seems like there's 24 new vendors every time, I go to one of these events, and it's kind of, everyone seems to say that they have, the best Kung Fu and their solution works the best. I'm probably not the best one to answer this question. Maybe Russ will, but let me just tell you kind of briefly how I think about this. At the end of the day, I think we can all get enamored with the new shiny object, right? And there is so much white space in this area. So a lot of new vendors can come about. And we are starting to see a lot more cyber providers with unique offerings. I'd like to say, instead of getting enamored with what's next and what's out there and what's new, it's a little bit of, well, let's stick to the basics. And a lot of the major vulnerabilities that I've experienced in my career were all because of the basics, which were, employee training. It was vulnerability management. So how are we doing on our patches? What about end of life? And as any operator will tell you, those right there are extraordinarily tough. Just getting end of life equipment out of your environments and dealing with patch management, all the employee training, and then testing that process to ensure that you're continually improving against that. I think if organizations spent more time improving those processes, that would go much further than buying the next latest tool. So for me, you got to have the minimum level of defenses out there. I want a simplification of my defenses, from the firewall all the way through to endpoint protection. It needs to be simplified. I need to have visibility, a single throat to choke, if you will, a single pane of glass, to be able to do analysis across that. But then your back office operations. So do you have a CMDB? Do you have ITIL based processes for incident, problem, change, configuration management? Are they followed? Those are the kinds of things that I would say most organizations tend to avoid, because, a lot of it's process work, a lot of it's repetitive work. And I think more risk can be avoided by properly addressing back office operations.
Wow, Ryan, I can't agree. I know so many people who, when they hear the word process, they run, but I think everybody who doesn't know or who has been in IT knows that process is what actually saves your butt, right? At the end of the day. Russ, I know you think a lot about business continuity. If someone came to you and said, I could add a bunch of nines to your business continuity status, would you believe them? How would you walk through that? Your BS meter.
Hey, but Steve, if you look, it looks like your protection has expired on your PC. If this is your
screen. Hey, that's something I got a process issue right there. There we go. We took care of it. That was done on purpose, just for fun. No kidding. Thank you, Ryan.
Oh, you just got hacked, Steve.
Yeah.
So to your point, I mean, this is the rub. I mean, this is really the dynamics. What Ryan brought up is that balance, when you're at that C level, the balance between boots on the ground and inward, the whole aspect, and we talk about it all the time, the people, process, and technology, right? That's that part of it. But at that C level, what's really the difficult part is that you need to be focused on the boots on the ground while simultaneously understanding what's that overall technology look like across all the platform, and how do you learn more about it? Is it your team members? Are you going to allow your security team to then look out there and take a little bit of risk, right? I'm one of those that really believes that you need to do that. They need to bring in, not get caught in the shiny penny, but they need to basically, if they see something of which then they think is advantageous, to have the opportunity to bring that forward. Now, what's really key, and we don't talk enough about this, and that is building those networks. whether it's at your team level across all fronts that are networking with others like peer institutions. That's really what's key. Same thing at the C level, making sure that you have that type of relationships built and that network of which then you can go out and find out what others are doing and learn from others. Because just going to conferences is not enough. What I do is that I create that network of those and that peer, but I also then look at it to the extent of what can I get involved with that gives me a sense of what's future, what's coming up. Organizations that are actually focused on new startups. I'll basically see if I can get involved and be a board advisory or just a participant, just to see what's going on in that new world. So then I can then look at that platform, working with my CISO to say, okay, what does that next evolution look like? Again, we're talking about platform as a service as an opportunity, right? As part of that. But that balance between that top layer and looking at new technologies, as opposed to that boots on the ground, that's where you really got to find that balance and really entrust your team members to take on that work and give them the opportunity to then play. Because if you don't have a team that's willing to and or has the expertise to play or playing within that sandbox arena, you're never going to get any better than where you were yesterday. And that's how I really laser focused on building out that aspect of it. Granted, I'm fortunate, I'm in higher ed, that I can create internship programs, that sort of thing that helps leverage that. But that's really how I focus on it from that top level and then the boots on the ground.
Well, thanks a lot, Russ. And I know that's important. We need all educational institutions around the world to help. We all know what's the biggest problem out there. We have a talent gap, right? So thanks for being a great mentor. And you said a couple of really important words that take us right into the next slide. And I'll let Suzanne see if we have a couple of questions coming in. But this is happening throughout IT. Things are moving from isolated tools or systems to platforms just due to the complexity that's out there. And look at what Salesforce and Microsoft are doing in terms of buying components to be an enterprise communication and knowledge-based platform. In security, I know you both feel this way, that if you have disjointed tools and data streams, it doesn't help you do anything that we've just discussed. It might help your team experiment, Russ, right? But if it's ungated, as you said, and it's not bounded by direction and strategy, at the end of the day, it's going to lead to a lot of wasted time and effort. So let's start with Ryan. The whole idea of a platform is, some people hate to say it, but this is what everybody wants. They want a single pane of glass. But again, there's a BS factor there. So how do you wrap your head around coaching the audience here today, Ryan? What does a platform mean to you? And what would some of the characteristics be that would help someone walk through that decision so they know they're going in the right direction?
Yeah, I mean, for us, we kind of lucked out. So we were evaluating. So just take a real step back here. So we developed our thoughts on development of a SOC. So we went out and talked to the marketplace and looked to determine, hey, is it better for us to build or buy? And we looked at everything from a Splunk installation to just a variety of different, whether it was Arctic Wolf or having TCS or Accenture or other companies kind of even manage a SOC for us. But ultimately, what we need to be able to answer is, with a variety of different international and state laws coming into effect around data privacy. So CCPA came into a law the other year. We need to look at, where is our data going? If it was exfiltrated, who do we notify? What kind of contracts do we need to have in place? And so for me, what I wanted to see is, I need a single unifying solution that goes everywhere out to the firewall, all the way into the credential. So starting with the credential, mapping out all the entire data flows. And I wanted that all into a single solution so that we can do, network traffic analysis to determine if we're seeing any type of nefarious behavior or something that's unusual. And that's where that XDR concepts come into place. Because for us, that was the first time we were able to tie in, Okta for MFA, CyberArk for our PAM solution. We're able to tie in our Tenables and our EDR solutions and our firewall, bring it all into a single place. And now we can start to test it. And we can now look at our processes and then test our processes and test our response times. And if you can't measure any of that, then you don't know if you're winning. So you got to first make sure you can measure everything and then set goals and then measure your progress against those goals. And we chose, you can choose a NIST framework. We even balance that against a CMMI leveling to say, okay, some of these processes are ad hoc. We really need to get up to a level 3, perhaps a level 4 in some of these areas. And only when we put all that in place and we start measuring, do we feel that we're at that level where we can give ourselves a grade. Okay, we need to improve in these areas for visibility and transparency purposes. So I would look at it more holistically. So let's not get wrapped up into a particular vendor, but you got to look at it as how well can my teams perform against this particular vendor or this platform, and what it look like across the entirety of the data flow.
Looking for the big picture there, Ryan. I like it. The forest, not the trees. Russ, how do you want to chime in on that? Add some commentary.
No, right, that falls right in line. I think one of the things that's, it's pretty, there's a little bit unique for higher education, because it is the Wild West at some level because of the freedom of information and basically the openness that they want to be able to maintain in certain aspects. So I have to have faculty that want that complete openness, yet I need to make sure that I've safeguarded everything on the financial side of it and HR and all the rest of it, and from the administrative side of the house. But one of the key aspects of it is that you really need to drill down on your basic metrics. Ryan brought up the whole aspect of getting that baseline, that scorecard. You can't get there unless you know basically what your ongoing is, your day-to-day, and build off of those basic metrics. I mean, right on down to, how many emails, how many spam hits, and calculating that up, right? And making sure how many servers do I have, measuring all of that. So then you can then build that up into, okay, I build my security into what I know what my baseline of metrics are. So I'm not over provisioning, but I'm in tune. But then again, it comes back to those resource allocations. If you basically have a solution for each specific area, you could have 30, 40, 50 different types of software platforms to do those individually. And that means you have to have a lot of individuals looking at that information to try and correlate between the two. How do you bring that together so you can do trend analysis and look forward? Look at the anomalies. Where is it that something, wait a minute, I have something that doesn't look right, and it's alerting me that this is not the norm, right? And from the outside in and inside out. That's really where this comes together from that platform, making sure you have that the visibility, because again, you have limited resources to work with. And I'll share with you, I mean, I've done a lot with Splunk in the past, tremendous tool, very powerful, but the overhead for something like that, I mean, you need to have some really top level individuals to be able to manage that platform for you. And there's no way you're going to keep those individuals. They're going to move on, right? So you need to have something that's rudimentary that basically can at least get in that middle tier that safeguards you to the extent where you're seeing anything that's going on and an anomaly or an event or correlation that's not of the norm, and you can react and respond accordingly.
That's excellent input, guys. I'm going to let you take a breather here, and we're going to go to the next slide and see, Suzanne, do you have any DMs or questions that came up to you?
Yeah, we do actually. Jonathan asked a question in terms of metrics. What are the best tools or methods to quantify the cyber spend in terms of risk and potential business outage?
That's a fantastic question. And that's actually one that we're currently thinking through right now. So right, wrong, or indifferent. So here's what we elected to do, and we just put a stake in the ground as a first way to start to record improvements. And it may change over a while, but we chose 5 metrics. And so we started with our basics. So we looked at percentage of vulnerable systems. So what is your patch management and what's your response time? So what we also found is some of our policies that we had in place, our IT operational policies around if a critical vulnerability is notified, what is the expectation for us to address it and mitigate against that? So we had to go back and look at our policies and make sure that we're even abiding by our own policies. But the number of vulnerable machines or patched machines, or those that may have a critical vulnerability is one metric. The other one was end of life. So we really started to look at that. So how many systems are end of life? And we all know, I mean, we're all operators, right? So there are some things that frankly can only run on a Windows NT machine. And even though it's obsolescence, can we, put it behind a Guardicore or DMZ to further protect it? So just understanding how many end of life machines are and what that looks like. We also look at phishing. So we took a very aggressive approach with that because phishing, we're seeing it with business email compromises, identity theft. So we actually went to the point of 3 strikes and you're out. So we put a policy out there that if we get you on a phishing, you automatically go through training. We get you again, your leadership is notified. We get you again in a 12-month period, HR is notified. And that could lead all the way to termination or further HR action. So, you know, we take this very seriously. So we also report to all of our CEOs that are within our portfolio companies how many times we've got them. You know, we've gotten people in their organizations. The fourth metric is security exceptions. And, you know, managing all of our business users, there's always somebody that wants to purchase a piece of equipment or software that's not within our standard directory. You know, that's just how it is going to go. If we assess the tool, we don't like it, but the business still wishes to proceed, then we have a security exception where they just note that it doesn't meet certain cyber standards. Therefore, we're going to put other mitigation controls in place, but we document all that. And so we also look at that and record it. And then lastly, on a biannual basis, we also do security penetration, ethical hacks, internal ethical hacks, and we'll also record our results there. Each one of those get a grade. You know, you can red, yellow, green it, but we just chose a grade, publish those quarterly, and then you can kind of gamify it against different business unit leaders or ultimately to the audit committee for board reports, just letting the organization see, you know, where we are and where we're trending. Those metrics may change over time, but those are the 5 that we elected to move forward with, just a good understanding of risk.
That's outstanding guidance, Ryan, because I know a lot of cybersecurity professionals now know that they have to have metrics and board visibility or the board's watching. So I think that was a fantastic set of ideas there to give people some direction. Ross, you said something very important. It's actually relevant to this slide. Look, the idea of visibility, it's never going to go away. You need to see more. The attack surface continues to grow. When we think we got our arms around it, guess what? Hackers come up with a new way to breach. So why don't you dive in? Feel free to add anything to what Ryan said, but also just talk about what's in your head and heart about how to keep up. How do you learn? You mentioned going to, you know, getting involved with startups, but are there organizations you can teach the audience that might be valuable? Because again, the target is moving in cybersecurity. It's hard to keep up with what's new.
You're dealing to your point, and dovetailing off of Ryan as well. One of the real challenges that plays into this as well is that it's not just that we're getting attacks from these, you know, we know everybody's basically, you know, these bad actors and everything else that we're getting hit with, but it's also one of where we're looking at our own vendors that really don't have a full understanding of our own environment to really then know what they need to be able to do to actually better protect us in certain aspects of it. So that quid pro quo. This is the reason why I talk about the whole networking piece. That's really key. I'll give it a perfect example. We found that there's an issue with Duo of how they basically, and for those who don't know, their passcodes. If you basically use their passcodes, they don't go away. And we actually had another university that got hit with it. But because of the fact of the networking aspect of it, as soon as that came up, they alerted this group that we put together. And then I knew exactly who could go to my security team and say, hey, take a look at what's going on with Duo. This is basically, we found a vulnerability with it. That didn't come from Duo. That came from us finding it ourselves between that networking piece. So I can't stress enough just how important that is to build that networking aspect of things. Now, back to Ryan, what he was talking about, those 5 areas. I'm right there with him. I can't get to that level because it's higher ed. It's pretty difficult for me to basically get someone to the point where we can actually then fire that individual. But we can push it to the point where we're basically saying we're going to cut off all access, because the fact that you're not following by rules, regulations, and have HR stand by it, and then have that hard discussion with them. But it really is tracking all those metrics to know exactly what that baseline is. From phishing, your number of emails, how many blocked attempts do you have? I mean, looking at that scoring and understanding that is it that ebb and flow, and making sure that you're being proactive. Training is really key, pushing back out all the time with constant training and onboarding of new employees. But the one key aspect of it that Ryan talked about from end to end, which is really ground zero, is asset management. You really need to really be focused with your procurement team to understand the life cycle and that asset management. Because if you don't have a full understanding of what's going on, you'll never be able to harden it to the extent where you feel good about how you're protecting your environment.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, Russ. And again, it's part of that whole mobility and more devices are out there kind of issue. They're all assets. We're running out of time, folks, and this is the great news. Not only do we have phenomenal speakers today, but guess what? Both Ryan and Russ are going to be at the Open XDR House on June 7 and 8. In fact, they're some of the keynotes that I'm proud to be announcing here shortly with, well, we're announcing it today. In fact, we'll be announcing it again. So not only are Russ and Ryan speaking, but you'll be on the website in about a week. We'll be unveiling a major update with a lot of great speakers. We have government officials. We have another university, Boise State, coming out to talk about a program. They're going to help people learn how to work through a breach, right? Imagine the stress of your board and your advisors and your peers as you're trying to work through an organization breach and recover from that. We've got some other phenomenal enterprise customers, and we've also got some MSSPs because a lot of customers need help with co-management. We're going to talk about that synergy. Russ and Ryan, if you can stay on for one question, maybe Suzanne, you've got one final question, and then we'll wrap it up for today.
Okay, I had a couple of kind of product-oriented questions, features, and a couple about SASE. Is it going to kind of how does?
Well, let's skip the SASE. Well, at a high level, I guess we could throw that out there. I mean, how do you? Why not? Let's say Russ and Ryan. How do you see SASE fitting in with XDR, Open XDR?
I mean, I think it's going to be critical, right? I mean, as we continue to move more and more to the cloud, you know, the concepts of replatforming operations from traditional data centers to a decentralized, closer to the end user, cloud-based IT operations is going to become more and more central. And so, you know, having our security providers be able to work in that type of model, you know, it's going to be critical.
Yeah, you're right on, Ryan, spot on. I mean, what it really boils down to is making sure that from a contractual standpoint with those providers as well, that you have that service level agreement and the protections around it, because you can only do so much, right? You can protect it to some extent, but you're going to be counting on others to be able to then pick up the rest of it, making sure that you have that built into your contractual arrangements. And then the last thing is this, is that, you know, one of the things we missed that we didn't, and I wanted to talk about before, not to segue off, but one of the things that's really key with everything we're talking about is to take all that information and all those metrics and all this information, including that balance we just talked about between SASE and what you want to do with, let's say, an XDR, that making sure that you are communicating effectively with your board members, creating a dashboard, making sure that you're actually sharing that information in full transparency, because they've actually become more educated over time and fully understand what those challenges are. These are your board members have run companies. They basically have been through this. And the more you are transparent, the better off you're going to be in understanding and getting that support that you need going forward.
Russ, that's great closing guidance. They have a fiduciary responsibility to have that challenge upon the team too, right? So it's a win-win. And I think transparency is a good way to be in business in general. Russ, thank you so much for making time today. Ryan, you as well. Look forward to seeing both your smiling faces in June at the Open XDR House with Suzanne and myself and the rest of the team. Everybody on the bridge, thank you again. Everybody have a great rest of week. Thanks again. We'll shut her down now, and we'll see you in June.
Thanks for the opportunity, Steve. Appreciate it.
You're welcome. Thank you, Russ.
Thank you, Steve. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Ryan.